My name is Katherine Throckmorton. I am in the Kingdom of Atenveldt, and this is a class that I like to call Period Makeup Without Lead Poisoning, which is actually a misnomer, a little bit of a misnomer, because as you'll find out if you take my next class, there actually are lots and lots of period cosmetics that don't involve heavy metals, but it seemed like a good title. And this class is going to be focused on how to get the look of period cosmetics using things that you can buy easily and at a reasonable price at the drugstore or grocery store. In this class, I'm going to focus on primarily ancient Rome, particularly like around the 1st century, so early empire. And then move on to sort of the High Middle Ages in Western Europe, and then the Renaissance also in Western Europe. Although those are the main areas that I've researched in terms of cosmetics, although certainly a lot of the information that you'll be learning today in the class could be applied to other parts of the world and other times and places. If you have any, I've done a little bit of research on other areas, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask those, and I'll be glad to answer them. Or if you know something about other areas and want to chime in at the end of the class, that would be wonderful. So now we will get started, and as I said, we're starting with ancient Rome. Now, in all of these sections, I'm going to be talking about what at the time would have been considered like full face makeup. Certainly wearing less is always an option, and when I'm showing you some images in a second here, you know, I will say I had to really cherry pick to find pictures of ladies that were clearly wearing cosmetics. So not wearing cosmetics, leaving something off is always a period option. Okay, so we are going to start here with ancient Rome. You can see the basic look that you've got going on. You've got skin that is not, you're not going for like a stark white, but it's definitely a lighter version of your natural skin tone. You know, smooth, pale, red lips and cheeks, and a fairly strong natural lip and eyebrow is what we have going on. So now we're going to start at the bottom by talking about base. Historically, what was used was a cream that in later sources is often called ceruse, which is a lead oxide. Don't use that. Mixed with some kind of starch and some kind of animal fat, and also possibly wax. You also had powder that was made from chalk, kaolin clay, talc, or orris root. The easiest modern option is to go for a liquid base that's, say, a couple of shades lighter than your natural skin tone, if you're someone for whom such a thing exists. Because again, you're wanting to go for a lighter version of your natural skin tone. And the reason for that is twofold. First of all, it's kind of a class thing, because you know, it shows that, you know, you're not poor, you're not a peasant, you're not a slave, you're not out working in the field. Also, for upper class Roman women, it's showing that, you know, you are displaying proper matronly virtue, and you are staying inside and, you know, working on wool and weaving and supervising the servants. You aren't going around, you know, going to the games, going out shopping, going here and there, having fun with your friends. And as we all know, if you don't have your own matronly virtue, store-bought is fine. So if you want to go for a little bit more, for a more period option, this is some talc body powder. It's talc and a little bit of scent. I got mine at Walmart. You can still get it other places. And the other thing that works really well, because as I was reading the list of ingredients for the period ceruse, it's like the oxide, fat, and some kind of starch or wax. And I was thinking, that sounds a lot like diaper rash ointment to me. And sure enough, if you look at the all-natural unscented diaper rash cream, it's basically, in this case, zinc oxide, which is non-toxic, starch, some kind of oil, and possibly wax. This one is, I'll hold it so you can actually read it. It's Hello Bello, which is, I believe, a store brand that Walmart sells. And this is the Burt's Bees. And both of those work really, really well for lightening the skin. I've applied some to my wrist right here, and you can see that it lightens nicely without giving me a really stark white. Okay, so that covers our Roman base. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, apparently there are some questions in chat. I thought I had the chat up and I don't. Okay. Okay, so no actual questions in chat. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to eye makeup? Okay, so eye makeup. The first thing that you're going to apply is kohl as an eyeliner, which historically kohl could be made either from lamp black, or it could also be made from antimony, which is toxic. I don't recommend it, or black lead oxide, which is also toxic, and I don't recommend you use. Just so you can get an idea of what the color is like, this is some lamp black kohl that I made. And you can see it's a really definite, really dead black. You can buy modern kohl. Unfortunately, a lot of the modern kohl that you get is still made with either antimony or lead oxide. So you probably want to avoid that. What I recommend using is just a regular, this one is from Maybelline, just the sort of soft crayon eyeliner pencil, and that works really nicely for this. This one is made by Pacifica. I don't know if you can read it, it's kind of shiny right now. But this is Pacifica, which is the vegan, not tested on animals brand that Target sells. And the cool thing about this one is that the black pigment in here actually comes from lamp black. So if you want, you know, still a modern option, but a little bit closer to period practice, Pacifica is the good one. Okay, then for the eyes, you're also looking at possibly adding a little bit of color back in to the eyelids. And the two things that show up both in the literature and the art are, this is the burned ashes of Damascus rose petals, which you can see is kind of a very soft sort of brownish black, and then saffron, which gives you this really nice soft golden yellow color. In a lot of the secondary sources, you'll see people talking about using powdered malachite and powdered lapis lazuli as eye makeup. Those are both things that definitely show up in Mesopotamia and also in Egypt. By the time in Rome, and by the time, you know, the Roman Empire is in what's now Egypt and the Middle East, it's the few mentions that we have that are talking about either lapis or malachite. It's very unclear if they're talking about using it as a cosmetic to add color, or if they're talking about using it to treat eye disease. So, you know, that's kind of up to you if you want to go with the more speculative colors. And certainly all of those colors, the yellow will especially show up in anything that's like a cover-up palette, and and any smoky eye palette will have a nice kind of soft brownish black. Now this is what I like to call my Roman eye palette. This is the Full Spectrum CoverGirl So Saturated palette, and I'm going to open it up. When I was in Walgreens, I about died laughing because you can see you've got a nice soft brownish black, you've got yellow, and you even have malachite and lapis blue. So, you know, there's your Roman eye palette right there. So that, you know, takes care of putting color back on the eyelids. Now, the brows are also, you know, they're a fairly natural shape, and, you know, eyebrow shape is one of those things where, you know, it's very personal, and it takes a lot of, and it can take a lot of time to regrow. So definitely you do you. But the goal is to have your eyebrows looking thick and full and fairly natural, and the lashes also. You want to look thick and full and fairly natural. And the reason for that is aesthetic, but it's also because the Romans believed that excess sexual activity and unchastity would cause a woman's eyebrows and eyelashes to become thin and fall out. So you want to have your, you know, properly virtuous brows and lashes, and, you know, if you don't have your own, store-bought is fine. In period, the eyebrows could have been darkened with either the same burned rose petal cosmetic that you're going to be putting on your eyelids. The other possibility would be either coal or burnt cork. A modern eyebrow pencil works really well for that. For the lashes, they would have been painted with soot, which is not something that worked terribly well, and you would get a lot of transfer. So even if you didn't start out with eyeliner, you would have liner on your lower lid by the end of the day. I personally like the Maybelline Great Lash Mascara. You want to get the non-lengthening, non-curved wand. You just want it straight to add color and a little bit of thickness. Okay, so that pretty much covers the eyes. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, somebody mentioned that, to be fair, syphilis does cause the thinning of the hair and lashes. That's true. On the other hand, I think the jury is still out on whether or not syphilis is endemic to Europe and Asia, or if it came in from the Americas during the Columbian Exchange. So so it could be Pliny. It could be that Pliny's right. The jury is definitely out on that one. And you know, we're not going to doubt Pliny for this. Okay. So for the cheeks and lips, your options are basically you've got red ochre, which any like nice, fairly matte reddish brown will do. You have alkanet soaked in oil, which could also be combined with wax to make a solid perfume or lip balm sort of thing. And you also would have another possibility is murex, which is the gland of the sea snail, the same thing that was used to make purple dye, which could be used to make a sort of very luxurious sort of reddish with a very slight hint of purple cosmetic. The other possibility was actually using the dregs from your wine cup and putting that on the lips or the cheeks to add some color as well. Now, if you don't want to do all that, I personally, and this is the part of the class that's going to start sounding like a Burt's Bees commercial, because they have a lot of cosmetics that are basically pigment and oil and beeswax, so fairly close to what could have been manufactured in period. If you're looking to match the kind of wine cup purple pink, this is the Burt's Bees Sweet Dahlia lip gloss. For alkanet, the Burt's Bees lip shimmer in either cherry, raisin, or rhubarb comes really, really close to matching the shade that you get from infusing your own alkanet in oil. And that is what I recommend you want to use for that. That pretty much takes us to the end of ancient Rome. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on to the Middle Ages? So now we are moving on to the Middle Ages. And basically in between the fall of Rome, so about the 6th century, really starting kind of like the 5th, 6th century, two really important things happen. The first is that you have, as the Western Empire is sort of collapsing, and there's a lot of disruption of trade routes and things like that. So there's a period of time where luxury items like cosmetics are harder to get a hold of. The other thing, of course, that happens is the rise of Christianity, which, the Romans were kind of iffy on this whole like wearing makeup thing, but a lot of people still did it. In particularly early Christianity, there's a lot of, we're rejecting all of this Roman luxury, and we're concentrating on the spirit rather than the body. So there's a period of time where, as far as anyone can tell, cosmetic use kind of just falls by the wayside. And then starting in sort of the 11th and 12th century, when cosmetics start to come back, they're a lot more subtle and a lot more restrained than what you saw in the earlier period. So basically the goal is you want to have this sort of youthful, fresh, maidenly look. What's often described as the lily and the rose on the face. So here we have a lady from the latter part of the 15th century. And you can see there's not a lot going on with the eyes or the brows. It's basically all, light face, pink lips, pink cheeks. Here's another lady from a 12th century mosaic. And then those of you who know your English history might recognize Elizabeth Woodville. Again, late 15th century, and light skin, pink cheeks, pink lips. And then this is a 13th century, let me see if I can get this in focus, a 13th century example from the Manasi Codex. And again, you've got light skin, pink cheeks, pink lips. And the way that could be achieved was, again, our, old friend lead oxide is still with us. Also, you still have chalk, talc, and orris root being used to as a powder. And then you also have the new kids on the block, the new hotness, which is rice flour. This is rice flour that I purchased at the Asian grocery store. When you're getting your rice flour, you want to kind of pinch the bag, and I can't, you'd be able to hear it if we were in person, but it makes this sort of squeaky sound. And that's what you want in your rice flour, because you want something that has a really fine grain if you're going to be putting it on your face. The other option is wheat starch. This is Sadaf. Really, you can use any kind of starch. For this class, I prefer to use wheat starch just because A, it's the more period option, and B, people generally know if they have issues with wheat. And I don't want to have you be the person who helps you figure out that you have a problem with lotus root or tapioca. So again, the easiest modern way is to just get a liquid base that's two, maybe 3 times lighter than your natural complexion, if such a thing exists. Another option would be to just use either wheat starch or rice flour as a powder. Now, if you're like me and are fortunate enough to have lived long enough to start developing a few fine lines, the starch powders can kind of settle in to your, will sort of settle into your lines a little bit. So a way to get around that is to use this really lovely early 13th century French recipe, where you're going to take wheat starch and rosewater. Rosewater is tremendously popular, both as a cosmetic and as a scent. And I need a little more wheat starch in there. And you're going to mix it around until it is kind of a thick, smooth batter, so you can see kind of the consistency. Then you're going to dab some up on a cosmetic sponge and apply it to your face. And then just wait a couple of seconds for it to dry. And then you're going to just sort of dry it off with a towel. And it settles into this really lovely sort of soft, very lightly white, and it feels like a really like hydrating, soft kind of powdery finish. And it stays on really well and kind of smooths things off. So that's something that you can use with materials that are still very easy to obtain. And, you know, it's also a period way of lightening your skin, which is kind of cool. Somebody was saying that roses were associated with sanctity, sainthood, and the approval of Mary. Yeah. So that's, you know, those are all reasons why, you know, roses are good, and why, you know, rose water specifically is favored even above other floral waters. It's also, it's also, when you're talking about cosmetics, because rose water has to be distilled in medical terms, it's also a source of distilled water to use for your cosmetic preparations, which is also a benefit. Okay, so that has taken care of the face. Now we're going to move on to the lips and the cheeks, unless anybody has any more questions. Okay. It looks like we don't, so we're going to move on. Okay. So by this point, red ochre and murex have pretty well dropped out of use. We're still seeing alkanet. The new hotness is going to be Brazil wood dissolved in rose water. And this is a sample of Brazil wood in rose water that I've dyed. So you can see it's a very nice sort of soft rosy pink color. But wait, you're saying Brazil is in South America. This is true. The country of Brazil was actually named after the wood. There is a tree that grows in Brazil, which is very closely related to a tree that lives in South and Southeast Asia, which, if you buy it now today, is usually called sapan wood, which was used both as cosmetics and a dye. So when Europeans first got to Brazil, they saw these trees and they were like, yo, we are going to make bank. So let's call the whole country Brazil. So that's why the country is named after the wood, not the other way around. And if you're trying to just get something that imitates the color, again, the Burt's Bees in rose and sweet violet both do a pretty good job of mimicking the shade that you're going to get from the Brazil wood application. I should say that for this, we don't necessarily know if they were putting the color on the cheeks or the lips or both. A lot of the recipes will just say things like to add redness to the face. And it's not entirely clear where on the face we're supposed to be adding redness. But so the assumption is that basically like lip and cheek cosmetics at this point are basically exactly the same thing. Okay, and you will notice that I left out the eyes. Again, that's because, you know, except for maybe a little bit of shaping and thinning on the eyebrows, there's really not a lot going on in terms of eye cosmetics. So that takes us to the end of the Middle Ages, and now we will move on to the Renaissance, unless anyone has questions or comments.
What were those two Burt's Bees shades?
Oh, let's see. They are Rose and Sweet Violet.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify, you said that you could find the Burt's Bees cosmetics at your local Walmart?
I get mine at Target. I haven't seen them at Walmart. I think that they carry at least a limited line of them. But I usually get mine at Target, or if you're in an area that has Sprouts grocery stores, Sprouts carries all the Burt's Bees products.
Okay, so basically a nature
yeah, exactly. Yeah, kind of like the more hippie grocery stores we carry at least a selection of Burt's Bees, and Target has some of that too.
My computer crashed when you were first beginning. Was there anything that said, or do you know anything about using crushed eggshells?
I have not seen anything about crushed eggshells. I know that the Globe Theater, when they do their, like, you know, down to the pins, historically accurate performances, they actually use bone white as a base.
Oh, okay.
Which I believe that is actually based on some like mid 17th century texts that are recommending bone white. But I am not aware of anything with eggshells.
Okay, thank you.
So now we are moving on to the Renaissance. And we will start out now, particularly early, you know, depending on where the Renaissance starts, where you are. So, you know, either in the latter part of the 15th and into the 16th century, basically what's going on is you still have a lot of carryover from the Middle Ages. So it's, you know, the lily and the rose, white and pink. One thing I forgot to call attention to in the Middle Ages is you're really going for like a full cheek sort of maidenly blush. So the whole cheek has a little bit of pinkness on it. Unlike in the Roman period where the color is more on the apples of the cheeks. And that's kind of the big difference that you start to see in the Renaissance is you're moving away from the maidenly blush to having the color back on the apples of the cheeks. And then as the 16th century progresses, I'm sorry, not the 16th, as the 16th century progresses, you're starting to see the look being a little bit more painted and a little bit less concerned with having a "who, me, wearing cosmetics" kind of a look, to something that's a little more obviously artificial. And in Italy, you start to see a little more emphasis on the eyebrows. And especially in Northern Europe and also in England, you're starting to see a little bit starker white and a little bit redder red. So it's, you know, you're looking a little bit more painted than you would have earlier on. So there's this first lady is Venosa Catanei, who was Cesare and Lucretia and Giovanni Borgia's mother. And you can see she's still got kind of the medieval pink and white going on, but it's a little more, but there's also like the color starting to shift up onto the cheek, and it's looking a little bit whiter. This next lady is also Italian. And then this is from the latter part of the 16th century, and you can see that her eyebrows are starting to get a little bit more attention. If she's lightened her face, they've probably been darkened again. And then we have this girl. This is a German painting. This is from the genre that I like to call the old dude is a creep, but that's okay because I'm getting paid. And again, we've got, you know, a very light skin and a little bit redder cheek, which is even more obvious with this lovely German lady here. This is another Italian example. And again, you've got, you know, the light skin, a little bit's going on with the eyebrows, and otherwise we're just kind of going for a pink and whiteness. Then this is, you know, from the latter part of the latter half of the 16th century. This is Helena Snakenborg, who I think has like the best name ever. And then, of course, we have our most famous makeup wearer of all, Queen Elizabeth I, who, you know, again, it's not in a lot of times, particularly in Hollywood movies, you see this like very stark, like almost like clown-like white, and that's not really what you want if you're trying to imitate the period look. Part of the reason for that, I think, is because a lot of sources will recommend that you use titanium oxide as a substitute for lead white. And titanium oxide goes on a little bit more opaque than the zinc oxide does, and definitely than the lead oxide does. So it gives you this sort of flat, matte, harsher white, rather than, you know, this sort of like soft, almost shimmery glow that you can get from zinc or from, or you know, of course, historically was used from lead. So again, to, you know, so we've still got our lily and rose going on. And to lighten the face, you still have a lot of the usual suspects for being put on the face, the most popular being lead white, which again was, the best stuff was imported from Venice. And the other thing that you start seeing used is the lead white with either rice flour or starch being put on top as a powder. And I'm just going to show you how that looks on my wrist using some of our rice starch. And as you can see, that's a little bit matte, a little bit more matte and a little bit more opaque than if I'm just using, the diaper cream. This was the Burt's Bees, in case you were wondering. But again, it's still, you know, not Bozo the Clown. levels of lightness. So, and of course, you know, just using a liquid foundation, a light colored liquid foundation is also a good option. Now for the eyes, again, you're not seeing a whole lot of emphasis on the eyes in Italy. By the latter part of the 16th century, you're starting to see maybe a little bit of darkening going on, just basically so that the brows look natural after you've taken some of the color off your face by using either powder or the lead white, or you are you're also, in some portraits, you're possibly seeing a little bit of darkening that's being done to the lashes, possibly with kohl, or just any kind of soot being sort of lightly painted on, which again, your Maybelline or whatever your favorite, you know, sort of, you don't want the super lash extending thing, just something that's going to add a little bit of color and thickness to the lashes. That will work really well. Otherwise, you're pretty much looking at whatever's there. Is what you've got is what you've got. There's not a lot being done with the brows and the lashes for the most part. Now for the lips and cheeks, we're still looking at primarily Alkanet and Brazil wood, and you also have the new exciting technology of red sandalwood, which is being dissolved in grappa. This was recommended by Caterina Sforza. Are you going to argue with Caterina Sforza? No, I'm not. And that gives you a very soft, very subtle pink color when you apply it to your lips and your cheeks. And the Burt's Bees Rose is the Alkanet and the Brazil wood. I'm sorry, not the Alkanet. The sandalwood and the Brazil would give you sort of a similar shade of pink. It's just that the red sandalwood is a little bit lighter and a little bit pinker. So for that, I recommend if you want to imitate that, I recommend using the Burt's Bees Rose. And that's going to come fairly close. And that basically covers the Renaissance. The big difference that I forgot to mention earlier was the big difference between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in terms of lips is that the Renaissance, you're looking at a much more natural lip, so you kind of want to apply your color evenly. That's also true of ancient Rome. In the Middle Ages, you want to have this cute little small Cupid's bow mouth, so you want to kind of put a little bit more color kind of right in the center of the lip to give you that Cupid's bow. And that is all I have for this class. So if anybody has any additional questions for times and places not covered in the class, or has any other questions or comments, we can hang out for a while and talk about makeup.
My lady,
Yes.
what were they doing in the Middle East?
In the Middle East, it kind of it kind of depends, or it kind of depends a lot on exactly when and where you're talking about. One of the things that is fairly consistent is using kohl as eyeliner. which is of course still fairly prevalent today. You also have a lot of emphasis on, dyeing the hands and the fingers with henna patterns. You have at various points, particularly when you're talking about, like later, like Safavid era Persia, you have madder and alkanet are the main things that are being used to sort of color the cheeks and the lips. And then at different points, occasionally you see a little bit of the lead white, especially in Safavid Persia, being used to lighten the skin. But that's a little bit less of a thing in the Middle East. And then at different points, like in Safavid Persia, you see people using kohl or other things to sort of connect the brows so that you have a nice sort of smooth connected arch. We don't consider that to be, attractive or desirable, but in the Middle East at different points, and especially in Central Asia even today, that's considered to be very attractive and desirable. So you'll even see poetry talking about the brows that meet in the center as being the bow of love, and the glances of a beautiful woman being shot from her eyes by the bow of love and striking her, her admirer in the heart. So that's kind of the little bit that I know about what's going on in the Middle East.
Did you get all of this from like one source, or?
It's just from kind of a lot of general reading on the history of cosmetics.
Okay.
If I can recommend, like if you're going to buy one book, I highly recommend tracking down a copy of The Artifice of Beauty, and that is by a lady named Sally Pointer. It's unfortunately it's out of print, but you can still find used copies for like right around $30. Are there any other questions? The both the lip shimmer and the tinted lip balm for the Burt's Bees products will be good. So this is the tinted lip balm. And then this is the lip shimmer, if you want to see what that product looks like.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
I'm kind of in modern day, I'm kind of leaning more towards matte because I find that it comes off on cups and glasses really easily. So
Yeah.
I was told that matte works really, really well, especially in events and whatnot. Do you find that the Burt's Bees stuff kind of works the same way, where it doesn't come off very easily? Or
it doesn't come. It stays on real. It stays on pretty well.
Okay.
Definitely, a matte lipstick or a cream blush is a very good. Is another very good option to use. I tend to favor the more natural products just because, again, it's like it's easy to get a hold of, but it also sort of gets you that half step closer to period practice.
Right.
But I find that the Burt's Bees tends to last pretty well. I mean, you have to, obviously you have to reapply it, particularly, sort of halfway through the day, especially if you've been eating or anything like that.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much true of anything.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you
You're
for
welcome.
such a wonderful class.
Okay. Okay, no, no other questions. Okay, so I will turn the room over to the next teacher. And thank you very much for coming to my class.